ANZAC, the becoming of a nation. As we left our friends upon that beach, thrown to us once ago, their bodies part of Turkish soil where the poppies gently blow. But it was not the end had not begun. We sailed to face a new enemy, gone for the front. ANZAC Day, a time to remember those courageous New Zealanders and Australians who have put their lives on the line, going beyond the call of duty for our country in times of strife and war. For many of us, ANZAC Day signifies the two world wars or other conflicts, such as the Boer War, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. For most of us, ANZAC Day particularly signifies sacrifices that were made at Gallipoli and the day that the ANZAC name was forever cemented in history. It was New Zealand's first major involvement in World War I. New Zealand's war effort began on the shores of Gallipoli. What happened to the New Zealanders after the grisly fighting of 1915? There were many battles that followed in the coming years, including Messines and Passchendaele, but it was the Battle of Somme that took place 100 years ago, and perhaps overshadowed by Gallipoli, which became one of the most costly battles of all time. The First World War was meant to consist of quick and mobile tactics. Over by Christmas, it was said to be. But a quick war it was not, and battles soon turned into 100-day offences. The result? Terrible slaughter and bitter stalemate, and like Gallipoli, Somme was no exception. The battle took place around the Saône River region in northern France and began in July 1916. The British aimed to relieve the French efforts at Verdun with a concentrated attack designed to crack German lines once and for all. The unspeakable reality for the British was 60,000 casualties in the first day alone. Another big push was planned for September, and this is where the New Zealand Division came into action. Many of the men involved had survived Gallipoli and were reinforced by 5,000 new recruits. Our Somme experience began on the 12th of September and proved to be a very different battle to Gallipoli. Gas shells, large-scale artillery, and an experienced opponent all took an overwhelming toll, not to mention the cold, muddy, and miserable conditions. At one point, the companies of the Otago Battalion were cut down by machine guns and left with almost one man standing. By the time the 15,000-strong New Zealand Division withdrew in October, they had 6,000 injured and had lost over 2,000 men, 600 of these on the first day alone, one of the worst days in New Zealand military history. It was an expensive victory, one of the most expensive of all time. 1 million lives lost on both sides for the sake of 12 kilometres ground. Amongst these men were two ANZAC survivors, my great-great-uncle Bill Leadley and my great-grandfather Horace McCormick. Bill had been part of the Gallipoli landings as a signaller in 1915 and had kept detailed diaries of his war experiences. He remained at ANZAC Cove until September, when he became seriously ill and was evacuated to England aboard hospital ship Mahino. After being reunited with his regiment in Egypt, he was sent to France and promoted to Sergeant Major of the Canterbury Company. On September 10, 1916, he was sent into the firing line at Somme as part of the New Zealand offensive. Only 14 days later, he was seriously injured, with a piece of shrapnel lodging so close to his brain he was thought to be dead. He lay amongst the wounded for 48 hours before being rescued, and it was his stretcher bearer, who was also shot during the rescue, who recounted the story to him as they lay beside each other in hospital. Bill recovered from his injuries, but it meant the end of the war for him, and he was sent back to New Zealand where he later married. Bill's diaries tell another compelling story of a short time at Somme. At one stage, he was trapped in a foxhole in no man's land for many hours with an English soldier named Harold Francis Stratton. They thought their last days had come and vowed that if they survived the war, they would name their first sons after each other. Bill, whose full name was Walter Edmund, kept his promise, and many years later there was a knock on his son, Harold Francis Leadley's door. The man introduced himself as Walter Edmund Stratton. Amazingly, he was the son of the soldier whom Bill had met at the foxhole at Somme almost 50 years earlier. Also at the Somme, but serving with the Wellington Regiment, was my great-grandfather Horace McCormick. He had been part of the Samoan Advance Party in 1914, before arriving at Gallipoli for the Battle of Chinabar until evacuation in December. He was sent to Egypt and then on to France in April 1916, where he fought at the Somme and later at Messines and Passchendaele. He spent a total of 936 days on the Western Front, where he was promoted to sergeant and then second lieutenant, and remained until the end of the war, arriving back in Wellington in 1919. He became a lawyer and later a farmer, and was also a New Zealand team official for the 1936 Berlin Olympics and the 1938 Sydney Empire Games. A stirring photo of Horace at the 1936 Berlin Olympics depicts him with the New Zealand team, surrounded by Nazi guards, a grim reminder of what was to come. Before the battles of Gallipoli and Somme, the New Zealanders were doubted by the British generals. They knew that. By the time the campaigns had ended, the Anzacs had proven the strength of a nation, regardless of its size. In doing so, they forged a new identity, a national identity, for it was in the trenches of World War I that New Zealanders began to refer to themselves as Kiwis for the first time. A quote by Ormond E. Burden, a New Zealand soldier, expresses this. Somewhere between the landing at Anzac and the Battle of Somme, New Zealand very definitely became a nation. The defeat at Gallipoli and the Somme slaughter were not setbacks, but triumphs. The New Zealand men in World War I were praised by friend and foe alike. My great-great-uncle, Bill Leadley, said this of New Zealand soldiers. These are the finest fighting men I have ever seen. I think we should remember them as the men and women whose bloodshed and spirit created a nation. In the words of an unidentified German soldier. The tragedy of the Somme battle was that the best soldiers, the stoutest-hearted men, were lost. Their numbers were replaceable. Their spiritual worth never could be, lest we forget.